With Herrerian's support, a crack appeared on the barrier protecting the proud Arthurs. Seeing this as an opportunity to damage Arthurs, Henry requested Saint Irene's divine power. The saint complied with Henry's request, kneeling to the ground as she channeled as much divine power as she could, squeezing every ounce like juice from a lime. Alongside Henry's 3 swords, the divine power continued to press against the barrier. More cracks formed, spreading like a spiderweb, until the barrier shattered completely, leaving Arthurs exposed and seemingly defenseless. However, despite appearing vulnerable, Arthurs remained confident and mocked Henry and the others, calling their efforts absurd. With a casual motion of his hand, like a conductor leading an orchestra, a red blade-like aura slashed through the air, striking Henry and the others and sending them crashing to the ground. Watching them writhe in pain, Arthurs commented on how much they had improved, admitting he was honestly surprised. Yet, he declared that if this was the extent of their power, they would never succeed in defeating him. Arthurs then unleashed an even greater surge of red aura. Wearing the smug expression of a typical villain, he sent the crimson spears hurtling toward Henry and the others with ruthless precision. Henry could only stand helplessly as the glowing spears pierced his chest, the sharp impact forcing him to cough up blood as his internal injuries worsened. Hector, too, was struck in the head, piercing his thick helmet and rendering him motionless. Herrerian suffered a fatal wound to the heart, collapsing to the ground in an unconscious heap. Crying and trembling in fear, Saint Irene ran toward them, desperately trying to save her fallen allies. But just as she reached them, Arthurs appeared behind her with the stealth of a predator. Standing over Herrerian, he gazed down at him with mock pity and claimed he always felt sorry whenever he saw him. Saint Irene, blinded by grief, ignored Arthurs entirely as she wept and attempted to heal Herrerian's wounds. Arthurs, unimpressed by her determination, questioned the Khan dynasty for hiding away his beloved god, Janus. Despite his grave injuries, Herrerian regained a sliver of consciousness and retorted that Arthur's current actions and behavior were the very reasons why Janus had been hidden. Arthur's expression twisted into one of disgust, yet he mockingly thanked Herrerian and the Khan dynasty for what he called their stupidity. With a smirk, Arthurs conjured another red spear, its ominous aura brimming with malice. As he raised it, he bade farewell to Herrerian with chilling finality. Witnessing the horrific scene, Henry mustered his strength to intervene, but it was too late. Herrerian's fading eyes reflected Arthur's arm as it swung the spear downward, the deadly strike landing with brutal precision. Blood splattered everywhere as Herrerian's body fell lifeless to the ground, his form now lying in a pool of his own blood. Arthurs, surveying the aftermath with an air of indifference, remarked on how dull and uninteresting the events had been, his tone laced with condescension. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his chest and discovered that a blade had pierced through him from the back. He turned and saw Hector still managing to stand. Arthur simply laughed it off and clenched his fist as if crushing something. Hector screamed in pain and agony, feeling as though his heavy, thick armor was being crushed under Arthur's grip, who was smiling as he did so. Hector fell silent and motionless, no longer struggling, as if he had accepted the inevitable outcome. Henry's voice echoed with despair as he watched Hector be crushed like scrap metal. Pieces of Hector's armor rained down around the area, and Arthur sighed. He commended Hector's courage in confronting him and inflicting damage. Then, he turned his attention to Saint Irene, who was tending to the injured Henry. He ordered her to heal Henry, his expression growing more villainous. He claimed that he would not let Henry off so easily. He wanted Henry to experience the depths of endless despair. While lying on the ground, Henry glared at Arthurs, who was mocking him. Saint Irene began crying, questioning her god as to why she had been given such a cruel task. Henry then reached out and grabbed Irene's hands, calling her name. He begged her to heal him, but Irene hesitated, fearing that if she did, Arthurs would only torture him further. Henry pleaded once more, using the word beg in a desperate attempt to convince her. Tears continued to stream from Irene's eyes as she closed them in anguish. Apologizing softly to Henry, she summoned all the divine power she had left and healed him. Henry was then enveloped in pure, radiant energy. Suddenly, the area around Henry shifted, bathed in the same glowing color of the divine energy. Arthurs and Irene were nowhere to be seen. Henry began groaning as if in pain before opening his eyes. Scratching his head in confusion, he asked aloud where he was. Without warning, a heavenly voice greeted him, causing Henry to flinch in surprise. He asked nervously who was speaking to him. From the light, a woman appeared, her pure white hair flowing gracefully down her white dress. She attempted to introduce herself, but paused, instead saying that people called her Irenia. She revealed that she was the very same deity worshipped by Saint Irene and the followers of the Holy Church. Irenia assured Henry that he did not need to worry about the outside world, explaining that the space they were in was one she had created specifically for him. Henry broke into a cold sweat, questioning if such a place was truly meant for him. Irenia confirmed it and revealed that, as long as he remained there, time in the outside world would move extremely slowly. She then asked a favor of Henry. On behalf of those who could not intervene directly in the world, she implored him to put an end to Arthur's madness. Hearing this, Henry's expression turned somber, as he admitted that he lacked the power to stand against Arthur's. He confessed that, since he did not believe in gods, he felt it was impossible to triumph over someone like Arthur's. Irenia shook her head and refuted Henry's doubts. She explained that he had been wrong all along, pointing out that he possessed divine power, but had never realized it. Henry, surprised, asked if it had something to do with the divine items he had borrowed. Irenia corrected him, saying that his power did not stem from faith in gods, but from something he had believed in for a very long time. When Henry hesitantly guessed that she was referring to magic, Irenia confirmed it. She explained that, while faith alone could not awaken divine power, his unwavering belief in magic had been recognized by other gods, including herself. As Irenia leaned forward, she gently placed a hand on Henry's shoulder and announced that they had prepared a sign of recognition for his deep faith in magic. A familiar pearl materialized in her hand, and she revealed it as a gift from the gods. Henry's eyes widened in realization as he brought out a pearl he had kept, the one that had hatched from the mysterious egg his friend had given him. Irenia confirmed that it was a god seed, explaining that obtaining it meant Henry now held the qualifications to become a god. At that moment, Irenia proclaimed the truth. Henry was no longer an ordinary man. He was now the god of magic. Just then, a friendly ball of holy light casually called out to Henry. Recognizing the shade of light, Henry realized it was the god of Ra. The god of Ra then transformed into his human form, adorned with a headdress resembling that of an Egyptian god. Given the dire situation, he immediately got to the point. He explained that the current Arthur's was merely a puppet of Janus. However, Arthur's did not yet possess the qualifications to become a god and was essentially a half-god. In other words, Arthur's was nothing more than a god's avatar. The god of Ra declared that Henry was different, as he now had the ability to become a god himself. This made Henry the only deity with a human body capable of directly intervening in the world's affairs. Placing his hands firmly on Henry's shoulders, the god of Ra urged him to defeat Arthur's, emphasizing that if Henry trusted in his own magic, he would have the power to prevail. Henry then questioned why the two gods' avatars, Saint Irene and Hilarion, were unable to stop Arthur's, who was merely a puppet of Janus. The god of Ra fell silent for a moment, before explaining that Hilarion's body was incapable of withstanding a large amount of divine power, unlike Arthur's. Furthermore, the saint who served Irenia was inherently unable to harm others due to her role as the goddess of love and peace. The god of Ra stressed that there was no time left to waste. He addressed Henry, now the god of magic, and stated that once Henry opened his eyes again, he would return to the hill where Arthur's was still battling them. As the god of Ra prepared to leave, Irenia appeared beside him, and the two began levitating away. Henry watched them ascend, their divine presence radiating through the air. In a confident voice, the god of Ra assured Henry of his faith in him, while Irenia, though visibly worried, silently conveyed her support. As their figures vanished into the sky, Henry became acutely aware of the divine aura now enveloping him. Closing his eyes, he felt his magic core begin to shine brightly. With newfound resolve, he chose to fully believe in himself and the boundless potential of magic. The scenery shifted back to the hill, where Saint Irene was still tending to Henry's wounds. As she continued her healing, Henry slowly opened his eyes and, with an air of casualness, uttered the words, "Magic Missile." Saint Irene watched in surprise as Henry's left arm lifted, channeling energy to the tip of his pointer finger. His gaze locked on Arthur's, and without hesitation, he pointed his finger toward him. Arthur's, caught off guard, froze in place until a beam of light shot through his body. For the first time, Arthur's was wounded, coughing up blood as a hole formed in his torso. He stood there, shocked and disoriented by what had just occurred. Doubt clouded his mind as he demanded to know how Henry had managed to attack him like that. Henry, now fully on his feet, appeared unfazed by the question and asked what Arthur's was referring to. Arthur's, still reeling, exclaimed that it was divine power, expressing disbelief that Henry had suddenly gained such abilities. After all, Henry was the protagonist of this story. Henry inspected his hand, sensing the flow of divine power within him. He realized it was strikingly similar to the flow of magic he was already familiar with. Arthur's, regaining his composure, declared that he would not be caught off guard a second time. Summoning a more ominous aura, he forged it into sharp, menacing weapons. In response, Henry manifested a magical blade formed entirely of divine power. With a tone of disdain, he remarked on how terrible it had been to deal with Arthur's and hoped they would never meet again. Arthur's unleashed his magical weapons, hurling them toward Henry with deadly intent. However, Henry, now empowered as the god of magic, effortlessly deflected the attack with a single swing of his divine blade. The ominous weapon shattered into countless fragments, leaving Arthur's utterly stunned. The sight of his attacks being nullified so easily left him dumbfounded, and Henry seized the opportunity to launch a counterattack. Arthur's attempted to resist, but it was futile. With one decisive slash of his divine blade, Henry cut Arthur's in half. The slash's power extended to Janus, the entity controlling Arthur's, severing Janus's neck and forcing him out of Arthur's body. Janus let out a final scream of agony before succumbing to the overwhelming power. As Arthur's lifeless body collapsed to the ground, Henry dissipated his magic blade, staring at the scene in silence. He wondered if it was truly over. A soft breeze swept through the hill as Henry murmured about the emptiness he felt despite the victory. Though peace had finally been restored, it had come at the cost of many lives. Meanwhile, within the walls of Mushu, hordes of zombies swarmed against the protective barriers. The old wizard remarked that they wouldn't hold for long, and that there was no choice but to trust in the great wizard and wait. Suddenly, the zombies began burning, leaving the wizard stunned. Henry then appeared through the use of teleportation. The wizards immediately inquired about Arthur's, as Henry's unharmed appearance could only mean one thing. Henry hesitated, searching for the right words. The wizards urged him not to keep them in suspense. Finally, Henry confessed that he had destroyed Arthur's with his own hands. Later, in Mushu's meeting room, Henry met with representatives from the allied nations. Biram burst into tears upon hearing what had befallen Herarion, his king. The orange-haired knight slammed the table in disbelief, unable to accept that Kington had betrayed them to the very end. The representative of the wizards asked if it was true that Henry had ascended to godhood and was no longer human. Henry confirmed it, but the old man couldn't help but express his skepticism. Henry admitted that he too found it surreal, as if it were some sort of joke or dream. Arania and Ra explained the events that had unfolded, though the others struggled to believe that the gods had spoken to him directly. Henry reaffirmed their claims and formally announced that he had taken on the grand role of the god of magic. His dear friend stopped addressing him as an equal and instead asked what Henry intended to do next in his divine capacity. Henry admitted that he hadn't given it much thought yet. Smiling, he remarked that it was his first time being a god after all. He then advised the others to rest, stating that he would take it upon himself to address the concerns of the devotees. Later, in Khan's cave, Henry returned, and as the wind from the cave greeted him, he noticed how his control over magic had improved ever since he became the god of magic. Teleportation had become as natural to him as breathing. Inside the cave, he stopped at a dead end and tried to recall the magic spell that Herarion had used before. Closing his eyes, Henry chanted the words he could remember hearing from the late king. The entrance opened, and a bright golden light, reminiscent of the sun, greeted him. Henry called out for Harabola and politely asked to be let in this time. His deceased friend agreed, and in an instant, Henry found himself in a different dimension. Harabola appeared and extended his hand toward Henry, asking him to take it. As their hands clasped, Harabola revealed that Ra had been searching for Hera. The two then teleported to another location, and a bright green light flashed before Henry's eyes. When Henry awoke, he found himself in a familiar setting. This time, instead of lying down on the ground, he was seated on a chair in front of a long table. At the other end of the table sat Ra, who looked genuinely pleased to see him. Knowing that they were now on equal footing, Ra requested that they drop the formalities, and Henry agreed. Without hesitation, Henry pointed out that he had fulfilled the god's request by defeating Arthur. However, he questioned why it was necessary for him to meet Ra in person after defeating the puppet of Janus. He expressed his frustration, accusing the gods of only seeking him out during desperate times. Ra noticed Henry's irritation and hoped he could offer some understanding, explaining that gods couldn't freely descend to Earth as though visiting an amusement park. Henry, curious about this remark, asked Ra to elaborate. Ra explained that while Henry might now possess divine status, he was not yet a complete god. To truly ascend to godhood, Henry would have to relinquish his mortal existence and refrain from interfering in the human realm. This revelation struck Henry deeply as he realized his continued presence in the human world could disrupt its natural order. Ra confirmed this, emphasizing that if Henry wished to fully embrace godhood, he would need to abandon his mortal body as soon as possible. Henry chose to set that concern aside for the moment, and instead inquired about Janus's fate and the reasons behind his actions. He wanted to understand why Janus had suddenly instigated such chaos. Ra explained that the powers of gods were directly proportional to the faith of their followers. Janus had devised a plan to convert not only the entire Eurasian continent, but all of humanity into his believers to gain the immense strength he desired. Confused, Henry questioned the necessity of such power, pointing out that Janus was already a god with considerable might. Ra revealed that Janus's true ambition was to amass enough power to challenge the king of gods, the supreme deity who ruled over all other gods. Hearing this, Henry broke into a cold sweat, realizing that even gods were subject to a higher authority. Ra, however, declined to share further details, explaining that Henry, still tied to the mortal world, was not yet privy to the full secrets and powers of the divine. He reiterated that Henry would only uncover these truths once he fully embraced his godhood. Ra urged him again to hasten the process and relinquish his mortal form. Surprisingly, Henry refused. He recalled Ra mentioning that once Henry became a full god, he would cease to exist in the human world and would no longer be able to intervene in it. Henry sternly claimed that he still had more things to accomplish in the human world. If Ra had nothing else to share, Henry expressed his desire to return. Ra warned him that he would regret postponing his ascent into godhood. However, Henry firmly replied that he didn't know about that, but he was certain he would regret it more if he left behind his burdens to become a god when he still had the ability to lessen them as a human being. Ra was surprised to hear such words from Henry. He couldn't help but smile. Agreeing to Henry's decision, Ra began to shine brilliantly like a lighthouse. The intense light blinded Henry, causing him to shield his eyes with his arm. As the bright glow faded away, Henry found himself back in the cave. He stood silently for a moment before smiling. Then, he called out to Herabola, promising to make his son's funeral grander than that of any hero who had ever lived. He vowed that Herarion's fame would be passed down through the generations. With a smile and the bright sunset behind him, Henry bid farewell to his friend. Meanwhile, at Caliburn's back gate, zombies swarmed the area like a scene from World War Z. The soldiers stationed there questioned how much longer they could hold out. The horde of zombies at both gates of Caliburn had been relentless, and they had been trapped in the fortress for a month. Food supplies were running dangerously low, and the rations grew thinner with each passing day. At this rate, they feared they would starve to death, zombie attack or not. They had also received no news from the members sent to seek aid from the capital, and could only assume they had perished on the way. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the fort, causing the soldiers to turn toward its source. They wondered what was happening so suddenly. Breaking into a cold sweat, they stared in shock as they saw the entire swarm of zombies encased in a massive chunk of ice. The soldiers stood frozen in awe, wondering who could have cast such a powerful magical spell. In the meantime, in Iselin's office, he reviewed the recent reports he had received. More zombies continued banging against the main gates of the fort. Their loud cries, roars, and incessant pounding on the walls were giving him a headache. Selin grew increasingly stressed as he observed how the monsters were becoming more and more frenzied. He even felt concerned for those stationed at the back gate. He wondered what in the world was going on. Just then, someone entered the room, apologizing for being late. The person addressed Selin as Commander, but quickly corrected himself to General in recognition of his recent promotion. Selin was startled, as the voice belonged to none other than Henry Morris. Seeing Henry standing before him, Selin asked why the renowned wizard had come to his office. Henry reminded Selin of his promise to assist him once Arthur's was defeated. He explained that he had returned to help settle the matters concerning the Demon King, just as he had pledged. Henry suggested they chat after everything was resolved. He then casually mentioned that he had already dealt with the zombies and monsters, so Selin would no longer have to bear the stress. Selin was momentarily stunned, but quickly realized the truth. Everything had indeed grown quieter than usual. He expressed his gratitude to Henry, thanking him for lifting such a heavy burden off his shoulders. He confessed how he had been unable to sleep properly for an entire month. Henry urged him to take a rest, assuring him that he would handle everything and return by dawn. Selin admitted he wished he could sleep, but his recent habits had made it impossible to do so. Without another word, Henry cast a sleep spell on him. Selin's tired eyes gradually closed, and he slumped onto the table in deep slumber. Before leaving, Henry assured the sleeping general that all his worries would be gone by the time he awoke. With that, Henry teleported out of the room, leaving Selin to finally get the rest he so desperately needed. Later, deep inside the Forest of Evil, Henry traversed the thick, shadowy woods. It had been several years since he last visited the place after being reborn, yet he could still recall its location as clearly as daylight. This was because, in his past life, he had worked tirelessly to stitch up the gaps of the underworld. Suddenly, Henry heard an ominous sound reverberating through the forest. He quickly identified its direction and sprinted toward a cliff. Below the cliff, a sinister purple light illuminated the area, confirming what Henry had feared. Below lay a gap in the underworld, brimming with ominous energy and swarming with monsters. It was a breeding ground where countless horrors were born, surrounding a kaleidoscopic core deep within. In his previous life, Henry had failed to fully seal the gap, but this time, he vowed things would be different. Raising his hand, he summoned divine power, a radiant glow forming at his fingertips. He unleashed a barrage of beams aimed at the underworld's fissure. However, the attack drained him quickly, leaving him breathless. His magic and divine energy rapidly depleted, and the roaring monsters below made it clear that his efforts were insufficient. The disasters lurking within the gap remained alive and unrelenting. Then, without warning, one of the ropes binding the gap snapped violently. A colossal hand emerged, tearing through the gap's barrier. Henry froze in shock as the monstrous hand lunged toward him, grasping him tightly. Exhausted from expending too much of his power, he couldn't mount a defense. The hand yanked him downward with terrifying speed, pulling him into the depths of the underworld. As the scenery around him shifted, Henry gasped for air. He found himself standing amidst the bleak and oppressive landscape of the underworld, dwarfed by a towering humanoid monster. The creature held him like a mere plaything, its grip unyielding. Before Henry could react, the monster drew back its massive right fist, preparing to strike. Helpless and drained, Henry could only watch as the enormous red fist barreled toward him with unstoppable force. That concludes this part of the recap. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to see what happens next. If you want to see the next part, let me know in the comments section below. Till next time.